Well, if you will, go ahead and open your Bibles now to the book of Proverbs, to chapter 31 and verse 10. We are setting a record this morning. We are studying in the 71st lesson of our study of the book of Proverbs, and today will be our last one in the chapter, or in the book of Proverbs. And Lord willing, next Lord's Day morning, we're going to begin our study of the book of Acts. And so I'm going to encourage you next week to have read the whole book of Acts before you come to worship. And I'm sure that most of you will be able to do that in just a matter of minutes. It's not as long as you think it is. And so I encourage you to spend some time in reading that. This final section of the book of Proverbs is amazing. Talks about the worthy wife. And it's been said, every mother must turn over the heart of her son to another woman, and hopefully that woman is a virtuous and a good woman. In Genesis 2:24, it talks about, this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they two shall become one flesh. That's the way God intended it. And so a wife is a good thing. Proverbs 18, verse 22. Whosoever finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains the favor of the Lord. Proverbs 19 verse 14 says, houses and riches are the inheritance of fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. So we're going to begin with the study of the godly, virtuous woman in chapter 31 and verse 10. So we're going to take them one or two verses at a time as we go through this section. Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The first thing that Solomon will say is, how much is a good wife worth? He said, well, she's more precious, she's more valuable, she's more worth things than rubies. Why do you suppose he chooses rubies? Okay, a royalty stone. It's valuable. If we want to compare something today to something valuable, if we're going to use money, what kind of stone would we generally use? Or metal would we use? Gold. And if you're talking about a stone, you'd say a diamond. Well, that's because of the value of things. Now, there are some metals that are actually more precious than gold are, but here the price of rubies. And I just want to give you just a little bit. Like, for instance, if you go back to chapter 3 and verse 15, you go back to chapter 8 and verse 11, or chapter 20 and verse 15, he talks about she is more precious than rubies, talking about wisdom. Verse 11 of chapter 8, for wisdom is better than rubies. Chapter 20, verse 15, the gold and the multitude of rubies, but the lips of knowledge are a precious jewel. And the reason why I bring this up is because when we see there's an illustration used, you've got to see it through their eyes. And for them, the most precious of the gems was that of the rubies during that period of time. So he's talking about her price being far above rubies. And every man who has a good wife knows the value of that wife to him. But now let's take verses 11 and 12. And I'm going to have to go a little faster today to cover 30 or 21 verses versus our normal 7 or 8 verses. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. Now, going back, it says the heart of our husband safely trusts her. The second characteristic of this precious woman is her trustworthiness. Now, when you think about trustworthiness, what do you mean about trustworthy? Fidelity. Explain to me what you mean when you talk about somebody being full of fidelity. Well, if you go back to chapter 7 and verse 19, he says, my husband is not his home. He's gone on a long journey. talking about the adulterous woman. If a husband's gone on a long journey and he has a good wife, can he trust her to be faithful to him while he's gone? Yes. In other words, he doesn't have to worry that she's going to find someone else or be involved with someone else. He safely trusts in her. That means she is loyal, she's committed, she's worthy of that trust. But there's something more in this, verses 11 and 12. Okay, go and do his business if he's on a long journey or something. But I want you to notice the latter part of verse 11 and verse 12. So he will have no lack of gain. And then verse 12, she does him good, not evil, all the days of her life. What kind of wife is she with regards to the finances? Okay, she's dependable, she's responsible, prosperous. He will have no lack of gain. Are there women who are so spendthrifty that they can spend more than their husband can make? Now, I'm just, I'm trying to be real. I've known several of those. And those who are just feel like they've got to have the latest and the greatest and the best of everything, and they can't afford it. And what happens is the husband says, I'm just drowning in debt. Well, why? Well, my wife spends a lot of money. Well, that's the same principle and everything. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She is working to try to understand that their marriage is a partnership. What happens in a marriage if the husband and the wife get in a competition about who can spend the most money? The ship is going to sink. And they don't understand that sometimes that's the outcome or the result of this. But she does this, notice, all the days of her life. She is a woman that you can depend upon day in and day out. She is a woman who's committed to her husband. She is so trustworthy. He doesn't have to worry about if he gives her money, what's she going to do with it? Stash it. She's going to spend it properly. And she may stash some up for a rainy day, but she is a person. And you got to go back and say, well, we live in a different society today. There, the man was generally the breadwinner, and then the woman was the one who guided the home. Well, we're going to study about that in a little bit later. But you have to understand what Solomon is saying about this. And this is something that his mother taught him. This virtuous wife, this worthy woman, her price is far above rubies. Look at what her husband can do, how trustworthy she is. Now let's take verses 13 through verse 15. She seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. And now let's go back to verse 13 now. She seeks. What does that tell you about her? Busy? She looks for good deals. Okay. She's looking for a bargain. That's a good point. That's a good way to put it. She contributes rather than just consumes. But now, when you talk about looking for a good deal, you're looking for a bargain, I think it's significant what she's looking for. What? Provisions? Wool and flax are both the animal and the plant kingdom that provides the source material for that which is woven. In other words, flax was woven as a plant to try to make rugs and other things. And wool was what was woven in order to make garments. So she is seeking wool and flax for the purpose of making some woven materials. And then it says she, and there's an adjective there, willingly works with her hands. Okay, she's evidently not lazy at all, because what we'll see particularly in verse 15. But I'm going to key on the adjective here. Willingly works with her hands. She desires to. It's not a matter of compulsion. You've got a mother who does so much for her children. Why does she do that? She loves them. Now, cleaning up a child who's been sick in the middle of the night may not be something that is pleasant, but it shows the fact that she willingly does that because she loves that child. And she does the same thing for her husband. That's why he can safely trust in her, because she's the woman who shows some industry in what she's doing. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 10, Paul writes about this widow, the good widow that he speaks of, is well reported of for good works. If she has brought up children, if she's lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. In other words, she's the kind of person who's looking for opportunities to do good. Well, that's the woman he's describing here in verse 13. Well, then verse 14, she is like merchant ships. What do merchant ships do? Bring in goods. How far away are the goods that are brought in? Ever far as they need to be brought in. For instance, if we want fruit here in Middle Tennessee in October, where are you going to have to get the fruit? California, South America, somewhere far off. And so you have to have merchant ships who go and get that and bring that in. She is like the merchant ships in that she brings her food from afar. We may not have this or we may not have that. Well, I'm going to go and I'm going to get what I need to get wherever I have to go get it. The industry of this woman is not that she's going to sit back and say, well, I didn't find it. I'm going to go look for it. I'm going to search for it. That's the kind of industry she has in herself. But then I like verse 15, the way it puts it. She rises while it is yet night. Now, what does that imply? She gets up early. What does she get up early for? She's going to cook breakfast. She provides food for her household. How many of you were raised with an old school mother who got up early in the morning and fixed a big breakfast every morning? My mama would get up, and I would get up about daylight, but she already had breakfast done. And it was eggs, and it was bacon, and it was biscuits, gravy sometimes. Our house didn't have as much gravy, but can't tell it by looking at us. But I mean, we had a big breakfast every morning. Yeah, and it was a lot more effort to do that. But that's the picture here. She's a woman who's not going to sit around and say, well, I got to be careful about some of my illustrations. I don't want to offend some of my family members. But there's some of them like the cereal's on top of the refrigerator. If you guys want it, you can go get it. That wasn't my mother. And that's the woman he's describing here. She gets up early, provides food for her household. But that's not the only thing she does. The word portion here is the word for appointment. or it's like, this is your task, this is your job. She gets up before it is daylight. She does that to make sure her family has food, but she's got another obligation. She runs the household. And all of those maidservants have to be given their jobs, their tasks, and she's given them their jobs because, if let's say work time starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, does the person who's in charge have to be there before 8 o'clock to be sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to do that day? Yes. This woman is not lazy. She is a woman of industry. She is a good woman. And I'll just give you another passage which I think is helpful here. Titus chapter 2 and verse 5. He says that the older women are to train the younger women to be discreet, chaste. Now the King James says keepers at home. The New King James says homemakers. Good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. The word homemaker in the New King James is the word for the woman who manages the home. That's her role. Does the wife have the responsibility of the household? She sure does. And that's what he's talking about here. And so this woman, you can depend on her because she knows what it means to get up and to do what is necessary to provide for her household. Now let's pick up with verse 16. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hand takes hold of the spindle. Now let's go back for just a moment to verse 16. We tend to think, well, if a woman's a homemaker, can she work outside the home? Now, I used to get that question all the time. Is it all right for a woman to work outside the home? And I always say, well, what does Proverbs 31 say? And they say, well, what do you mean by that? She considers a field. Now, let's take that word considers. What does that mean? She evaluates it. Well, now that requires a little bit of knowledge and intelligence, doesn't it? To consider a field. Some of you men who go out and you invest in property, what's one of the things you want to do when you consider a piece of property? Am I going to make any money off of it? Is the value of it going to appreciate? Location. But then what am I going to do with this property? She considers a field. Now notice when she considers the field, what's in the field? But on this passage, what's in the field? Apparently nothing. She considers the field and buys it. Well, this woman's involved in real estate. She's able to value the price of it. Is it a good value? Is it something that I can do something with? Will it be able to make any profit? But then from her profits, that's an interesting thought. Later on, we're going to study a little bit more about what other activities she's engaged in. But does this woman make a profit in the home? Well, she seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. She's evidently making stuff for her own household, but she's making stuff to sell. Lydia was a seller of purple. From her profit, she plants a vineyard. That piece of property she bought, so she's involved in real estate. Now she's involved in agriculture. Man, that ought to be making us a little bit ashamed by now. She gets up before breakfast and fixes the meal. She gives all the tasks to the maidens. And now she's gone out and she's sought wool and flax and worked willingly with her hands. And now she sees the field, she buys it, and now she's planted a vineyard. This woman knows what she's doing. I don't think verse 17 is any surprise at all. She girds herself with strength. What's the word gird mean? Bind? What's the idea of girding yourself with something? Like you're putting on a coat. Mm-hmm. Okay. To gird means to put on something. You know, you gird up your loins, you put them in place. She's putting on strength. Well, she's done everything she's doing. Man, this is a strong woman here. And strengthens her arms. She's not content to stay where she's at. She's wanting to continue to get stronger. This is a woman of considerable talent and ability. Verse 18, she perceives that her merchandise is good. Now, you're going to have to ask the question later, what all does she mean? When we get down to verses 24 and 25, we'll understand what merchandise she's talking about. But here, she perceives that it's good. Not only is she able to value the value of land, but she knows what her product that she's made is worth as well. It's good. And because it's good, it deserves to be paid for. But then the latter part of this verse also goes back to what he said earlier, that she rises while it is yet night, and now it said her lamp does not go out by night. What does that mean? She has a long day. Prepare through the night. You know, she has a day which she does a lot of things. You know, I just got to put us men in a place. You may not realize how much your wife does until she gets sick or something like that, and you have to, maybe for a week, maybe she's in the hospital or something like that. When it comes to buying the groceries, cooking up the groceries, washing the clothes, taking care of cleaning the house, how much time does it take to do all that? Considerable. Many women start early in the morning, and when everybody else is wanting to sit down and rest at night, what's she doing? She's still working. She's still folding the clothes. She's still doing other things such as that. And so it says, her lamp does not go out by night. I'm amazed at this woman of what all she is able to accomplish. She doesn't allow herself to get behind because she considers herself as a person. Now, verse 19 goes along with this. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. Those are two parts of either a loom. Y'all know what a loom is? What you weave on? I get in my mind a spinning wheel. How many of y'all know what that I'm talking about? See, I grew up in Alabama where they grew cotton. And my grandfather made spinning wheels for the old women back then. We're talking about probably in the 60s. I remember him making those spinning wheels. And they'd take that and they'd take a little wheel at the end and they'd spin that cotton into thread. She is the type of woman that she's willing to put her hands not only to the loom, to the weaving of stuff, but she's even willing to make the thread that comes from it. That just tells you one level more of her industry, of how much effort she is willing to put into all of this. Now let's take verses 20 through 23. She extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Now, let's go back for just a moment here to verses 20 through 23. This illustrates her compassion and concern. How does she think about poor and needy people? She's benevolent. She extends her hands to the poor, reaches forth her hands to the needy. Just like she reaches for the spinning wheel or the loom, she's reaching out to try to help people who are less fortunate. She's made profits. She's a woman of extreme industry in her own home, but she's not just looking at how it affects her, she's looking at how it affects others as well. Now, verse 21 says, she's not afraid of the snow for her household. They're all clothed with scarlet. Not only does she reach out to the needs of others, she sees to the needs of her own children, her own family. And she doesn't have to worry about them because they are well clothed. I was blessed with a great mother, Christian mother. But my mother worked at the garment factory when I was a kid, and she made all of our clothes. Now, I know little girls got their dresses made, but little boys got their clothes made too. In fact, she even made clothes for Mark and Micah after they were born, up to they were probably 10 years old. And she knew how to sew, and sew well. She made quilts. She made blankets. She actually knitted a king-size bedspread that I wanted that went all the way to the floor, all the way around. Y'all know how many skeins of yarn it took to make a quilt to go on a bed that large? But I love it and appreciate it. Nobody else is going to get it as long as I'm alive. That was a great, great blessing. Well, this is the way she looks for her household, and she's not afraid for them. Snow can come. I've got clothes on them. It'll take care of them. But then it said, what about her concern for herself? It might be easy to think, well, this woman takes care of everybody else, but she doesn't take care of herself. She makes tapestry for herself. Now, what is tapestry? Well, decorative. That's the good word there. It's beautifully decorated. It's this woven stuff that has all these colors in it. We tend to think of a tapestry today as like a rug that's hanging from a wall. But we're talking about something, this is what she wears. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. She doesn't wear ugly looking clothes. Everybody else is taken care of. She takes care of herself too. What does that tell you about this woman? She's got self-respect. She tries to make sure that she looks as attractive as she possibly can. Well, that's an amazing woman here. Well, then verse 23, no self-respect as well. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Does a good wife make a good husband? Or the old phrase, behind every successful man is a good woman. And people don't always give the wife credit. Here's the man, he gets the credit, but who's behind him taking care of everything that it's necessary for him to be who he is? Well, he's sitting at the gate. She's buying crops, or she's buying fields, she's planting crops. She's doing everything. But he has attained to the point now where he is a respected leader of the community. When he sits among the elders of the land, he's earned respect because his wife has done him good and not evil all the days of his life. Well, let's move on to verses 24 and 25. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Now, let me get verse 25. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She makes linen garments and supplies sashes. Well, that wool and flax that she has bought earlier, it's been made into garments. She supplies them to the merchants. She has a good business going in textiles. Now, we talked about she's good in real estate, she's good in agriculture, she's good in textiles, and she's a good economist as well. Boy, this woman is really worth a lot of rubies, isn't she? That's what he's talking about. She's not a socialist. She is a producer instead of a consumer. But I want you to notice verse 25. Sometimes I read over these verses and then I skip some of the great parts of it. Strength, we've already talked about in her arms, but strength and honor are her clothing. She's strong, she's honorable, respectable. That's her clothing. And she shall rejoice. Literally, the word there is she shall laugh in the time to come. She has conducted herself to the point where she is so confident about the future, she can be able to meet it with joy rather than sadness. Are there going to come difficult days in life? Yes. What if, for instance, it says we're going to have a bad crop next year, and somebody says, well, maybe we'll have a drought, and the woman says, I'm not worried about that. I've still got 42 cans of beans in the cupboard. I've still got 20 bags of corn in the freezer. She can laugh at the time to come. You know why? She's prepared. Because she's worked so hard now, when the difficult days come, she's ready to meet them. Let's pick up verse 26. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. Two things that's coming out of her mouth. What are they? Wisdom and kindness. Wisdom says you think about what you're going to say. Kindness says you say it right. How many of you men have ever had your wife say, shh, don't you say it like that? Wisdom and kindness. And Proverbs 15 and verse 28 says, the heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. There's several other, but I'll just give you one more. Colossians 4 and verse 6 says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with the salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. I tell you what, women have a good way of polishing the rough edges off of us men, so that we say things the right way rather than the wrong way. And this woman, her speech is impeccable. Verse 27, she watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Watches over the ways. Watches over the ways. How many of you got teenage kids? Okay. How big of a challenge is it to watch over the ways of your children? That's more difficult than working with flax and with wool. That's more difficult than buying a field and planting a vineyard. That's more difficult than making sashes and selling them to merchants. Watching over the ways of your children. That's a level of obligation, a parenting that is just an amazing part of a woman. And who can often put their hands on their children and still their fears and also inspire them? It's Mama. And then the latter part of this, we already knew this was true. She does not eat the bread of idleness. She's not lazy in any sense of the word. Proverbs 14 verse 1 says, the wise woman builds her house, and that's what she has done. No, she's actively involved in this.
Talking about children, your hope and desire at a certain point is that the child does the right thing and not constantly correct. And so sometimes watching is just, and then when they do the right thing, then you
praise the good, punish the bad. All right, the final section, verses 28 through verse 31. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Now, first thing you'll notice in verse 28 is her children rise up and call her blessed. One of the greatest honors that any woman can have is to be appreciated by her children. Y'all agree with that? Be loved and appreciated by her children. You remember what John wrote? Greater love has no man than this. Well, we're thinking about 2nd and 3rd John. Children walking in the truth. To see his children, to see her children, see his children rise up and walk and do what is right, and then to know now that the children are appreciative for that, to express their appreciation for that. They rise up and call her blessed. Let me make a suggestion. If you still got your mama, tell her that before she's gone. Some of us don't have that opportunity anymore. But let her know that you appreciate her. Let her know that all the stuff she's done for you all these years, that's something that you truly value. Her husband also. Men, we don't do a very good job sometimes of telling our wives how much we appreciate what they do for us. You agree with that or not? We fail to express our appreciation for all they have done and continue to do. And it says, he praises her. Be sure you tell them that you appreciate, but you praise them for the job they do. Now, let me ask you a question. If a person is appreciated, will they do a better job? Yes, they will. And a little praise will go a long, long way. Oh, it is. It's a two-way street. The woman has to reassure the husband that she believes in him and appreciates what he does. But I just think in this case, Solomon is trying to say, this is what my mother taught me. Learn to show appreciation to your mother and to your wife for what she has done. In verse 29, many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. In her eyes, she needs to know that you think she's number one. You excel them all. In my eyes, there's nobody better than you. Now, verse 30, and I'm trying to not run out of time here. Charm or grace is deceitful, and beauty is passing. Now, I think I need to stop here for just a moment. Graceful favor or charm is what we would refer to as social graces. Can those things be deceptive? Can you see people who come and they're all nicely dressed and they've got such a beautiful speech, and then you go to their house and it's a wreck? Or you can see somebody who talks about how great things are, and then you see their family. Grace is deceitful. Charm is deceitful. Beauty is vain or passing, which passing is a better idea. What happens to every one of us? We get old. And get old, what happens to your skin? It starts wrinkling. Starts sagging. Yeah, you get your turkey neck. Unless you're fat enough to not have the turkey neck. Yeah, good. But that's it. But before Kurt rings the bell, I got to take verse 31. Give her the fruit of her own hands and let her own works praise her in the gates. Her own behavior speaks louder than the words of anybody else. Thank you for studying Proverbs together with us.